So, my name's Keith O'Donnell. I run a company called Fennec Consulting. We focus on how we can commercialize innovation and entrepreneurship. So very much tied in with what you've just heard from the tech scalers. And so today, I wanted to give you something that you could take away. So instead of just talking about how an ecosystem can be commercially viable, I'm also going to give you a winning strategy for a video game at the same time, while also maintaining the restriction that we are not allowed to build a volcano layer, which is, in essential, the old Google adage of do no evil, except we're not removing that from the employee handbook. So, let's get in it. What's Civilisation? Civilisation is a strategy game made by this guy, Sid Meier. It's a game that simulates going from an initial settlement all the way through the millennia to try and achieve one of several victories over either your opponents who are players or computer-controlled AI. Double check I got my notes here. This whole game sets us up with a fine allegory for the types of things we have to consider as a nation looking towards our place in the world. And you've heard all the things about what comprises our ecosystem, what comprises the thoughts, the feelings, the drivers for everybody involved in this ecosystem. So we're going to try and contextualize it in this point. So, within the game, there are several different victory types. These are summarized as culture, diplomacy, domination, religion, science, and score. Now, pretty self-explanatory. Culture, you've just got to be the America of the game. Everybody's got to be completely saturated, wearing your jeans, drinking your sodas. Diplomacy, you've got to be the world leader. Everybody de facto looks to you in a point of emergency. With domination, you're military. You go and you crush everybody. There's no survivors. Religion, you're the dominant force. Everybody believes in what you believe, and you're in charge of the church. With science, which is what we're going to go for, this is about essentially leading in technology development, being able to bring your culture into every horizon possible, and eventually get up into space. And then finally, score is what happens if you run out of time in a Civilization game. And the game will couple up all of your points towards all of these other victory types, and then assign a winner. But we're going to double down, and we are playing as the mighty Scottish nation. So let's just take away this troublesome bit at the top here. We're not going into imperialism today. We are focused on Scotland as a player. And what you'll see here, a couple of things and a massive amount of stereotyping. Our main unit is the Highlander. Our civil amenity is golf courses. We have Scottish Enlightenment, which is going to help us later on. We'll come back to that. We're maybe not going to go into doing the War of Liberation, because again, we're going for no volcano layers. We can't do any evil. But we've got Robert here. Robert's going to represent us. And this is our coveted science victory that we are going to deliver. So how are we going to do this? Well, there's 9 steps. And the first step starts off with our policies. So in this policy, we focus on inspiration. We think about how we can create as many great people as possible. So for us, we're going to be thinking about great scientists. We've got many great scientists all about the world. They go in, they do research here, they proliferate their research internationally, they win Nobel Prizes. And these are just some of the people that have existed in history. How are we going to focus on being able to create more great people in the future? And this is really something that we need to think about making a coherent strategy to bring up people to have their own eureka moments. How can you enable someone who might just be sitting in a high school at the moment with some wild, crazy ideas? They have no idea how to turn these ideas into reality. You think about what's the support mechanisms you're going to have to put in there. What are the funding mechanisms we're going to put in there in order so that they can build their idea, how they're going to prototype it, how they're going to commercialize it. All these things you've heard about today, we should be thinking about how we create more of these great people. And while we're on policies, we should also be thinking about focusing on a market-driven economy. Now, in the game, your market-driven economy focuses on trade routes, and these trade routes help you share your production, your food, your culture, your science, your religion to other nations, just like the Silk Roads of old. But much like what we have now, we have international markets that open us up to new ways of doing things, open us up to new clients that might want to come and invest in Scottish businesses where we're best in class in the world. But we might also be able to go and work with them to tackle even bigger problems, where maybe we have core specialisms in certain areas that we're working with other people can maybe help us to do the big problems that are really facing us in the world today. Things like inequality, global hunger, and climate change. From there, we move on to production and science. So within production and science, you have to think about both at the same time. You might think, well, we're going for a science victory, why don't we just focus on science? If we can't produce anything, we're not going to be able to prove the science works. In the game, the production is used to build your units, it's used to build your buildings, it's used towards the end game when you've finally researched all of the science to build your victory, which takes you up into space. The same goes for here. If we're all theory without being able to prototype, build, deploy, deliver, it's not going to work out for us as a country. So in a real-world comparator, let's think about industrialization in space. And that might seem like a little bit out there, but realistically, we're running out of resources on Earth, especially for things like rare earth metals. And these are used in superconductors, semiconductors all around the world. Where is there an abundance of them? Well, at the moment, it's places like Australia, but they'll eventually run out too. So where else do we look? Well, they originally got to Australia by falling from space. There's a big asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter where you can find quintillion tons of gold that would absolutely destroy our economy. You can also find things like barium and lithium that we use for all our consumer electronics just now. So how are we going to get there? That's a global type problem. What if we started to see the industrialization here in Scotland? So thinking about not only getting up into space, but how do you build things like staging points? How do you refuel? How do you start moving transit between an Earth orbit to a lunar orbit, or a lunar orbit to a Martian orbit, so that you can actually start mining? What does mining look like in space? If you've got workers in space, what does biomedical and hospital look like in space? There's no gravity, so you're going to struggle with some of that. And we need to start thinking about these things, because these are problems that are going to be facing us in the next 25 years. And if we think about the foundations of them, such as a hypothetical one that we're working on at the moment as part of Fenwick, about turning the industrialization of the maritime industry along the Clyde into rocket and satellite fabrication. You may think, that sounds nuts. Well, it is. But if you think about the fact that we've got a burgeoning space industry that you've heard about today in Scotland, where we can do mission planning, we can do component design, and we can do satellite design. Why can't we build the satellites and the rockets in Glasgow? You might say because we don't have the equipment or the skills, but those are things that we can plan towards building. And then once we've built it here, we can take it along the Clyde, we can go down the coast towards Ayrshire, and we could test and commission it at a ballistics testing facility that exists just south of Stranraer. If we can test and commission it there, we can then either put it on a railway, take it up to Prestwick, we could put it up plane on an MOD airfield, which is where we're testing it, or we could put it back on a boat, send it up to the Shetland Isles to launch it from places like Saxonwood or Sutherland. These are all realistic things that we have the capability of doing just now, but thinking about how all these projects link together ties up in a global way. Because again, if you can do everything in Scotland, you don't have to worry about things like sensitive technology, import and export licenses, which reduce your amount of time to market and reduce the costs that are involved in it. And this comes from having a concentration on production. On a global stage, I had a diagram for that, that's brilliant. So these are the places I was talking about, that's the Clyde side, these are the different parts where we can do the testing. On a global stage, you don't need to be rounded. You definitely don't want to be mediocre when you're starting to think about competing with everybody everywhere. So in the game, if you're mediocre, you'll get overrun. You need to concentrate on one type of victory. So we can see us already doing this with things like the Marine Tech Cluster in Oban. It's our investment in creative and media. It's based in Dundee. We have the offshore wind farms that are being researched and developed through work in Aberdeen. And finally, the creepiest robot in a balaclava I've ever seen today. This is from Edinburgh with the Bayes Institute. Our end goal is the same, no matter where we're from. We're all focused on an end goal of sustainable and realisable technology growth that boosts our economy. But all of this requires us not to be dissonant. We can't cannibalise success from each other. We need to think about how we best support each other as an entire country, rather than focusing on maybe local neighbourhoods and local districts. And this is why a coherent strategy for the whole country becomes more critical. And this will all become a lot better when we have a coveted science victory, which I'm always going to tie it back to. Now we have international relations and specialisations that are world class. We have the ability to barter these internationally. So we have existing partnerships, we are sharing our research, we're helping to generate co-author IP and patents internationally. This allows us to work with our partners to develop breakthroughs in science. These research alliances that we used to have when we were part of Europe could be restored. We just have to make sure it makes commercial sense, no matter what your view is of being part of the European Union or not. As well as looking further afield to what opportunities we've got, maybe being outside of the European Union, being able to talk to other countries in the Commonwealth or other countries as part of a Six Eyes agreement that we have in cybersecurity. If our output is structured and excellent, it'll be very easy to work with us on an international stage. Now, if we look at pushing science without a consideration of how our people will experience it, we'll end up in this situation. Everything will just bleed out. Nobody wants to go through all this effort of developing all this strategy just to benefit other people. But we've got a secret weapon to tie back, our Scottish Enlightenment. And when you take a look at this last bit, ecstatic cities double all of these amounts. This is as true in the game as it is in real life. We can't rely on weather like Silicon Valley can, I mentioned that earlier today, but we can make our cities attractive and ecstatic. By making sure that we're tolerant, we embrace diversity, we have world-class recreation, a good degree of tech savviness, which is created by things like our tech scalar plans here, and pair this with world-class recreation, we get a brilliant ecosystem that leads to more of these ecstatic cities. And don't forget, no matter how many amenities are available, a place to live is also really nice. No one really wants to run businesses out of cardboard boxes and such. So we have to consider what our housing strategies are going to look like. That's a very convoluted and detailed topic. We have all day to cover that today. But it's a consideration, just like in the game, you need to make sure you're looking after where your population are going to be. Next up, we need to think about campuses. And the campuses in the game are basically going to be your science accelerators that you build as part of your cities. This term campus was originally coined around 1746 for Princeton, and it was essentially a field that was dedicated. These campuses became special districts, and in historical senses, this is where the tutors and the students co-lived together. And Glasgow University was originally founded. It was land that was given over by the landowner at the time, specifically for the academic research, the same as Oxford and so forth. This is a list of all of our primary university campuses. You'll notice this does not cover things like where our colleges are, where our vocational hubs are, where are the other routes for people to get in. And this is why we need to start thinking about coherent data around this as well. It ties together how our campuses can interact and link with each other. Where we have these campuses that have dedicated specialisms, knowing how they can partner up, knowing what works, but also making it inclusive towards other institutions that have maybe been left out of the conversation because maybe they're smaller, their specialism is more minute or more niche. It starts to help pull it together. And this is something that we can connect in detail better. We're starting on a proposal at the moment with Glasgow City Council around how we identify deal flow, and that's to help startups to be able to figure out where they are on the treadmill, where investors can come in, how they can get boosted, and then we're going to start to think about, well, if it works for Glasgow, why can't it work for the whole of Scotland? It's just about economies of scale. Next up, avoid conflict. It should just be good life advice at this point, but not being prescient about ownership is a key to avoiding conflict in real life. In Civilisation, the game, my advice to avoid conflict is just don't piss off Gandhi. He's got a bug that makes him super aggressive in the later stages of the game. But when we're starting to think about how this affects us in real life, we start to think about how many different parties are going to be involved in this. So if we were just to focus on startups, I brought this up earlier. This is our capitalistic summoning circle. It's going to look a little bit like this. But to maximize growth within here, we need to follow these steps. Have a common agenda, make sure that all our measurements are shared, have mutually reinforcing activities that pull people together, force them to come back, share their ideas, develop their ideas, and then take them forward. Have continuous communication, where we're showcasing the successes we've got. We're also showcasing our failures, because they could be learned from. And finally, we have supportive backbone organisations that are there to facilitate growth. If you face a problem, there should be somebody you can go to for help, and that's going to be key to how we develop this going forward. When playing a game, as planning for a country, allies are going to be essential. If everyone is at peace, you don't have to divest as much of your production into defence. On the country front, when we look at this in real life, we can consider our internal allies that are needed as well. So here, we have an ecosystem that's not just startups. Growth has to sustain everyone around the periphery of this, and it's an emerging middle ground. These forces all support everything to build a national innovation engine, and that innovation engine starts to seed all of our growth. We have low-hanging fruit objectives that we can use to help boost this. So for example, if we're thinking about doing this to make it so that you can do startups quicker and easier, what about having standard sets of contracts that we can use that make everything safer, secure, quicker to be able to transact with each other without having to go through tons and tons of revisions of addendums? Now, that might be quite an aggressive thing to say if I was talking in front of a room full of lawyers at the moment, but lawyers will get more business from when it goes beyond the MVP and the POC. Making it so MVPs, minimum viable products, and POCs, proof of concepts, can be generated quicker leads to more larger scale business as we grow on. We also have the consideration of thinking about how we develop our business skills. So while we've all been focused on digital and tech skills today, what about the peripheral skills you're going to need for running a business? Things like negotiation, how do you network? How do you do an elevator pitch? How do you go and attract funding? How do you go through all of the various hoops that you need to jump through in order to get funding? That sort of guidance is really critical and essential. And this makes us a more coherent place to be able to develop our new technology or service and contributing to our global viability. So, wonders are a feature within the game that are one-time buildings. If one player builds them, no one else can build them. But building them gives you significant bonuses. And these are all the science-based ones. We have Oxford University. I'm going to refer to my notes here because some of these are hard to pronounce. The Amundsen Scott Research Station, the University of Sankoa, a Biosphere, and Etemenanki, which are all wonders that boost either production or science. So if we're going for a victory, priorities these ones in these orders, win the game pretty easily. But, unfortunately for us in the real world, all of these have been built, and none of them has been built in Scotland. So, let's change it slightly to building more science-based wonders. So let's boil it down. A wonder should be a project that inspires people to create. It should instill a sense of awe, but also deliver a world-class service. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, while pretty to have looked at in history, also served a purpose there. So did the great libraries of Alexandria at the time. The pyramids of Giza had a function. These are a few projects that I'm aware of. So we have our spaceports, Saxavord up in Shetlands. We have Glasgow Prestwick Spaceport, which is going to become a horizontal launch station. We have offshore data centres that Microsoft are putting out into the sea. And we have the Edinburgh Biotech Cluster, which is leading on genetic research globally. Now, these might not be the pyramids of Giza, but they're a step in the right direction. They inspire. They give us a reason to think, yeah, anyone can go ahead and do this. There's a place to go and do it. And this is the right direction we should be thinking about. So, if we have followed all 9 of my steps, we should get to the coveted science victory screen. That's what it looks like in the game. Our real world victory is going to be a lot less thrilling. It's going to be sitting and watching the 6 o'clock news, and there being some graphs and charts about unemployment decreasing, people being more happy at their job, consumer price index rising, all of these different charts and graphs that come into it. Might even come from a statement from the Treasury talking about a decrease in national deficit. But though this might sound boring, these are things we should aspire to. Because it comes to the primary thing that I hope everybody in the room can agree that we care about, which is the fact that we are proud to be Scottish no matter where we go, because we didn't have to build a space laser in a volcano. So I've been Keith O'Donnell. If you want to connect with me or challenge me to a game of Civilisation, these are how you get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to take anyone on, talk further about these strategies, or talk more in depth about how we can develop either your idea or the wider picture to be a little bit more equitable for everyone. I thank you all for having the patience to stay to the end of the day. I hope you've enjoyed Digital DNA. I hope you've enjoyed this talk, and look forward to, if anyone's coming along to the socials afterwards, getting a chance to have a beer with you. Thanks very much.